Hello, I'm Sean Munger. I'm That History Guy. This is the second video I'm making about mysterious goings-on the distant Pacific island of Palmyra, an uninhabited atoll about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. In the previous video, I talked about the disappearance of a man named Malcolm Graham, a yachtsman from an old New England family who vanished on this island in 1974 and has never been seen since. Malcolm Graham, called Mac, was married to Eleanor Eddington Graham, better known as Muff. In 1981, a subsequent visitor to Palmyra Island was walking on the beach and discovered a mysterious aluminum container that had washed up there in the lagoon. Human bones had spilled out of the container. The remains were subsequently identified as Muff Graham, and obviously she had been murdered. The story is well documented in the true crime bestseller, The Sea Will Tell, which is written by lawyer and historian Vincent Bugliosi, together with co-author Bruce Henderson. It was published in 1991, contemporaneously with a TV miniseries that was made about the case. An excellent movie, really a great movie, but very, very obscure, doomed, I think, to failure because it just happened to air during the climactic phase of the Persian Gulf War, which was going on at the same time, and everyone was watching CNN, so they weren't watching the miniseries. Bugliosi, the former Los Angeles district attorney who successfully prosecuted the Manson family, had by the 1980s become a private criminal defense lawyer. After Muff Graham's bones were found in 1981, the couple who had last seen them on Palmyra, Wesley Walker and Stephanie Stearns, were both charged with her murder. By this time, they were no longer involved. Walker, in fact, he was usually known as Buck Walker, was in fact already in prison for an unrelated crime. Bugliosi became Stearns' defense lawyer, and the book was written mostly as his account of her murder trial, which occurred in 1986. She was acquitted of first-degree murder. Buck Walker, who was tried separately, was found guilty of Muff Graham's murder in 1985. Since Stearns' acquittal, and particularly since Bugliosi's book publicized the case, there's been a controversy about whether or not the jury got it wrong. Was Stephanie Stearns in fact innocent, or did she participate in the murders? We say murders plural because although Mac Graham's remains have never been found, he's never been seen again, and it's presumed that Walker did away with him as well as with Muff Graham. Some people simply can't believe that she was not involved, that Stephanie Stearns was not involved. This island, after all, was completely deserted of any human beings except for those four, the Grahams, Walker, and Stearns. And the authorities, at least in 1981, were pretty convinced that there was little chance that Walker and Stearns did not act in concert to kill the Grahams. Logic, however, tells a different story. The crux of the matter of the Stephanie Stearns case involves critical thinking, not assumptions. If you think critically about the case, there's an extremely strong argument that Ms. Stearns is innocent. If I had been on that jury, I would have voted to acquit. Here's why. The prosecution's theory is that Walker and Stearns killed the Grahams mainly to get possession of their luxurious yacht called the Seawind and sail it back to Hawaii. Their own boat, the Iola, was barely seaworthy. They were running out of food. The friends who were supposed to resupply them did not show up, and things were getting desperate. Furthermore, tensions between the couples, rooted to some degree in class and in political differences, this was the early 1970s, after all. Those were said to be ratcheting up. There had been a number of witnesses who came and went on the island during the summer and were able to testify as to what was going on, although none of those other people were there on the day of the murder. Stearns and Walker did, of course, end up in Hawaii sailing the Seawind. They claimed that the Grahams had had a fishing accident back on Palmyra, and they found their boat, an inflatable Zodiac, washed up on the beach of the lagoon, incidentally very close to the exact place where Muff Graham's remains would be discovered in 1981. This sounds like pretty strong circumstantial evidence, doesn't it? But think about this. The remains of Muff Graham were put into an aluminum box, wrapped with wire, and sunk in the lagoon of Palmyra Island. Her body had been dismembered, and there were attempts to burn it to prevent identification. Logically, why, if Walker and Stearns had done it together, why would they have chosen to do this? They were alone on the island except for the Grahams. If they did it together, they could have killed the Grahams at any time they wanted and in any way they liked, then brought the bodies with them on the sea wind when they left Palmyra, and then buried them at sea, virtually guaranteeing that they would ever be found. Mr. Bugliosi, in fact, made this argument in his summation in the trial in 1986, and it's reproduced here on page 528, 529 of The Sea Will Tell. He says, quote, "If Buck Walker committed these murders with Jennifer Jenkins," that was Stephanie Stern's alias for purposes of the book, "if they participated in these murders, doesn't common sense tell you that disposing of the Grahams' bodies far out at sea is the obvious thing they would have done? It would have been very easy, so easy for them to have transported the bodies on the sea wind until they were hundreds of miles out at sea and then thrown the bodies overboard. That way they could have been virtually 100% sure the bodies would never be found." End quote. This alone is very strong evidence of Stearns' innocence. Wesley Walker took great pains to hide the bodies in the aluminum containers in the lagoon because he had to hide them not so much from the authorities, but from his girlfriend, Stephanie Stearns. He had to do it in such a way that she did not know that he had killed them. Otherwise, why bother? It doesn't make any sense. There are various other logical clues that indicate quite clearly that she not only didn't take part in the murders, but that she knew nothing about them. One of these clues is the fact that of the two of them, Walker and Stearns, it was Stearns who had the better knowledge of sailing. And in fact, it's possible that Walker felt he couldn't get off of Palmyra without her help. If he intended to kill the Grahams and knew that he couldn't get off the island without Stearns' help, then he had two choices open to him. One, enlist Stearns in his plot to kill them, convince her to help him do it, and then help him get off the island when he was done. Or two, kill the Grahams himself, conceal the murder from her, making her think they died in an accident, and then she would be motivated not only to help him get off Palmyra, but also to go to the outside world to bring back help and find out what happened to the Grahams. Option one is not very sensible. How would Walker know that she'd go for it? If he said, "Hey honey, let's go kill the Grahams," and she refused, suddenly he's screwed. If she chooses not to go along with the murder plot, it's not like she's going to sit around and do nothing while he carries it out, and then kindly help him get away by sailing the boat back to him, with him to Hawaii. Thus, by even asking the question, by even suggesting that for her to help him kill them, he'd be taking an unacceptable risk. Option two, however, is much safer. If he can get away with it, meaning if he can kill the Grahams without her knowing about it, he not only has a ride off of Palmyra, but he has an eyewitness who will insist that he didn't kill them and that they died in an accident. In fact, Stephanie Stearns was never willing to say that Buck Walker did it, so it seems that his gamble paid off. Even while he was defending her, Bugliosi made it clear to her that he thought Walker did it, but she refused to believe it, although deep down she may have understood that that's the only thing realistically that could have happened. Also consider this. If Stearns had participated in the murder, there would be evidence linking her to the crime. Once Walker was arrested in 1981 and charged with Muff Graham's murder, and once it was clear that they were going to be tried separately, why on earth wouldn't he have claimed, as part of his case, that she did it alone and not him? If, in fact, she was involved, Walker could be 100% certain that evidence would show it. So then his only job at the trial would be to convince the jury that he had no knowledge of it and that she was the mastermind of the whole thing. By 1985, when the trial occurred, their relationship was history. He owed her nothing. If he knew for sure that she did it, there's absolutely no reason why he wouldn't have maximized his chances of acquittal by pointing the finger at her and her alone for the murders. Yet he didn't do that. Indeed, at the end of his life in 2010, after he was out of prison, long after Stearns had been acquitted and could not legally be tried again for the murder of Muff Graham, Walker wrote a book in which he also did not point at Stearns as a co-conspirator. He claims that he killed Mac in self-defense, not that she did it. It's a silly theory, but it's very strange for him to do that if, in fact, she did do it or knew about it. Why didn't Walker accuse his girlfriend, either at the trial in 1985 or in his fraudulent book that he wrote in 2010? Because he knew that all the evidence in the case would point solely to him, and none of it to Stephanie Stearns. If he accused her falsely, it would just make him look more guilty. Thus, leaving her out of it and pleading innocence on his own without pointing at her as the murderer was the least bad of all of Walker's bad options. Since he was in fact guilty, he knew this wasn't likely to work anyway, and it didn't. I'm confident, very confident, that Stephanie Stearns is innocent, that she knew nothing about the murders, and that the jury's verdict in her trial in 1986 was completely correct. Vincent Bugliosi, incidentally, was a brilliant lawyer, a logician, and a historian. In addition to having written Helter Skelter and The Sea Will Tell, which is what he's most known for, he's also the author of the single best and most comprehensive book on the John F. Kennedy assassination, and that is this book called Reclaiming History, about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, in which he demonstrates in very exhaustive detail how there was no conspiracy in the murder of John F. Kennedy and that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. The purity of his logic and the incisiveness of his reasoning, both in that book and in this one, The Sea Will Tell, is actually very, very impressive. And that's why Bugliosi is one of my favorite authors. Sadly, Mr. Bugliosi passed away in 2015. So thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe, and share. Thanks.